Imagine trusting someone with your entire life savings, your retirement, your children's college fund, your family's financial future. Now imagine that person. Someone you've known for decades, someone introduced to you by your best friend, someone who was once the chairman of the NASDAQ stock exchange, was running the largest financial fraud in human history the entire time. That's not a movie. That's what happened to thousands of real people when Bernie Madoff's empire collapsed. And by the time it was over, $65 billion had evaporated into thin air. This is the story of how the most trusted man on Wall Street became the most despised criminal in American financial history. Welcome to Dark Ledger, where crime meets money. I'm your narrator, and every week we pull back the curtain on the most shocking financial crimes in history. If you're new here, subscribe now. You will not regret it. The golden boy of Wall Street, Bernard Lawrence Madoff, was born in Queens, New York in 1938. From the very beginning, he was ambitious, intensely, relentlessly ambitious. He started Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities in 1960 with just $5,000 he had saved from working as a lifeguard and installing sprinkler systems. $5,000. That's it. And from that, he built what appeared to be one of the most successful investment firms in American history. By the 1970s, Madoff was instrumental in creating what would eventually become the NASDAQ stock exchange, the second largest stock market in the world. He served as its chairman. People didn't just respect Bernie Madoff. They revered him. He was considered a genius, an innovator, the man who modernized American markets. And his investment fund? The returns were extraordinary. Year after year, while other firms struggled, while markets crashed and burned, Madoff's fund produced consistent, reliable, almost impossibly steady returns of around 10 to 12% annually. Every single year. In good markets, in bad markets, in crashes, in recessions, 10 to 12%. Always. That consistency, the thing that made him so attractive, was the first sign something was deeply, profoundly wrong. Because no legitimate investment strategy in history has ever generated perfectly steady returns regardless of market conditions. Markets go up, markets go down, returns fluctuate. Always. Without exception. But nobody questioned Bernie Madoff. Because who were you to question the chairman of the NASDAQ? How the scheme actually worked. Here's the brutal simplicity of what Bernie Madoff was actually doing. He was not investing a single dollar of his client's money. Not 1 cent. Instead, he was running what is called a Ponzi scheme, named after Charles Ponzi, who ran a similar fraud in the 1920s. The mechanics are straightforward. When a new investor gave Madoff money, he didn't invest it. He deposited it into a special bank account. When existing investors wanted their returns, their 10 to 12% annually, Madoff simply paid them with the new investors' deposits. No actual investing, no actual returns. Just a constant flow of new money paying off old money. The scheme required one thing above all else to survive: an endless supply of new investors bringing in new cash. The moment that flow slowed, or stopped, the entire structure would collapse instantly because there was no underlying value. Just an empty shell held together by trust and reputation. And Bernie Madoff was very, very good at building trust. His client list read like a who's who of global wealth. Steven Spielberg's charitable foundation, Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Prize-winning Holocaust survivor, banks across Europe, hedge funds, pension funds, the New York Mets ownership, ordinary retirees who had handed over their life savings because their friend's cousin's accountant had gotten them into Madoff's fund and hadn't stopped talking about the returns since. He created an aura of exclusivity. You couldn't just ask to invest with Bernie Madoff. You had to be referred. You had to be approved. That exclusivity made people want him even more desperately. When you finally got access to his fund, you felt privileged, special, like you'd been admitted to a secret club for the financial elite. It was all theater, every bit of it. The man who tried to stop it, here's where the story gets truly maddening. Bernie Madoff was not uncatchable. He was not a criminal mastermind operating in the shadows beyond the reach of law enforcement. He was exposed, repeatedly, by a financial analyst named Harry Markopolos. Markopolos first became suspicious in 1999. His boss asked him to reverse engineer Madoff's investment strategy so their firm could replicate the results. Markopolos sat down with the numbers. Within 4 hours, he concluded that what Madoff was claiming to do was mathematically impossible. The returns couldn't be generated legitimately by the strategy Madoff claimed to be using. The numbers simply didn't work. So Harry Markopolos went to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the federal agency specifically responsible for catching exactly this kind of fraud. And he told them Bernie Madoff was running a Ponzi scheme. They ignored him. He went back in 2001. He submitted a detailed, mathematically rigorous report titled, "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud." He laid it all out. The impossible returns. The suspicious accounting firm. A tiny 3-person shop in a strip mall auditing a multi-billion-dollar fund. The red flags were everywhere. The SEC investigated briefly, and then closed the case. They found nothing. Because they weren't looking hard enough. Because Bernie Madoff was too respected, too connected, too important to be a criminal. In one meeting, investigators were reportedly intimidated by Madoff's status and essentially accepted his explanations without pushing further. Harry Markopolos tried 5 times over 9 years. 5 times. The SEC failed every single time to uncover what one private analyst had spotted in 4 hours with a spreadsheet. The day the world ended for 37,000 people. The 2008 global financial crisis was the beginning of the end. When markets crashed and the economy seized up, investors around the world began pulling money out of everything, including Madoff's fund. In the final weeks of 2008, Madoff faced withdrawal requests of approximately $7 billion, and he had nowhere near $7 billion. On December 10, 2008, Bernie Madoff called his 2 sons, Mark and Andrew, both of whom worked at his firm, into his apartment. He told them he was finished, that his fund was one big lie, that there was nothing left, that he had nothing.
His sons did not cover for their father. The following morning, they called a lawyer. That lawyer contacted federal authorities. The next day, December 11, 2008, FBI agents arrived at Madoff's penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. They asked if there was an innocent explanation for what his sons had described. Madoff told them no. There is no innocent explanation.
He was arrested on the spot. The scheme had lasted at least 17 years, possibly as far back as the 1970s. The total fabricated account balances shown to clients, $64.8 billion. The actual cash that could be recovered, less than $3 billion. The victims were staggering in number and scope. Charities wiped out entirely. Retirees who lost everything. Families destroyed. Elie Wiesel's charitable foundation, a Holocaust survivor's life work, gone. Over 37,000 victims across the world. Some victims took their own lives. Justice, tragedy, and what it all means, Bernie Madoff pled guilty on March 12, 2009. He did not go to trial. He stood in a Manhattan courtroom and admitted to 11 federal crimes. Securities fraud, investment advisor fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, false statements, perjury, theft from an employee benefit plan, and 3 counts of filing false reports with the SEC. He was sentenced to 150 years in federal prison. He was 71 years old at sentencing. The judge called the crimes extraordinarily evil. The aftermath was devastating on a deeply personal level. His son, Mark Madoff, unable to bear the shame and the relentless attention, took his own life on December 11, 2010, exactly 2 years to the day after his father's arrest. Bernie Madoff's other son, Andrew, died of cancer in 2014. Bernie Madoff himself died in a federal prison medical facility on April 14, 2021, at the age of 82. He had served 13 years of his 150-year sentence. His wife, Ruth Madoff, who claimed she knew nothing, lost virtually everything. She was permitted to keep $2.5 million. She has largely disappeared from public life. The SEC was humiliated. Congressional hearings were held. Oversight reforms were promised. The man who had tried to warn them, Harry Markopolos, testified before Congress and did not hide his contempt for the agency's failure. And what is the lesson of Bernie Madoff? It is this. In finance, if something seems too good to be true, if the returns are too consistent, if the strategy is too secretive, if the access is too exclusive, if the numbers don't fluctuate with the market, it is too good to be true. Every single time. $65 billion, 37,000 victims, one man, and a world that trusted him when it absolutely should not have. If this story made your jaw drop, wait until you hear what Elizabeth Holmes did to Silicon Valley. A $9 billion lie built on a single drop of blood and an enormous amount of audacity. That video is up next, and it might be even more shocking than this one. If you're new to Dark Ledger, subscribe right now. We post 2 new financial crime stories every single week. And if today's video made you think about protecting your own financial identity, check the link in the description. I'll see you in the next one.